Good evening. Please may I welcome you to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee taking place in the Walton Suite. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Margot Power, Chairperson of the committee. Please could I advise that the meeting is being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council's website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting will be uploaded to the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting. Please could I remind any officers joining virtually to turn off their cameras and mute their microphones until invited to speak. Could I remind members to speak clearly, concisely, and remember to use your microphone. Finally, please can I ask that mobile devices and other electronic devices are silent or switched off in time. Thank you very much. Nancy, do we have any apologies?
No, Chair, we don't. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And do we have any disclosures of interest? Councillor Krask.
Thank you, Chair. A personal but not prejudicial interest in regards to my employment at KPMG.
Thank you very much, Councillor Krask. I have no chairperson's announcement. However, following a meeting to discuss non-operational assets held with myself and Councillor Godfrey, Mr. Botham does have an update for us on how we intend to move that forward.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we had a helpful discussion with members concerning questions raised about non-operational assets at previous meetings. I've had discussions with our head of estates, Jeff Coe, who is in the process at the moment of updating and refreshing the council's asset management strategy. We felt there being some merit in a group, maybe a group formed from this committee of members to meet with Jeff to talk through the early preparation that he's working through, the information that he's pulling together, the detail of some of the impact on the financials and the capital programme that will have, and allowing you the members to challenge and understand really how that information comes together, what will be included, what you need to see by way of governance of that programme. And we felt and certainly Mr. Coe would welcome that discussion as well. He thinks it would be a better document for that discussion. So.
And we would welcome the opportunity to reassure council.
Okay. And we are working on that, the early stages of that process at the moment. For a meeting time shortly after Christmas would be helpful for Mr. Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Botham. That was a very useful discussion, I felt, and I hope Councillor Godfrey feels it was useful as well.
If you want us to give it useful.
Thank you very much. Next agenda item 4, to note the Audit and Governance Committee work programme, pages 5 to 6 of your papers. Do we have any questions? So we are happy to note that paper. Thank you very much. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
The next agenda item is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 22nd of July. Pages in your papers, pages 7 to 10. Are those agreed? Councillor Gellar.
No, it says I'm present.
Oh, I do apologise.
Apologies, Councillor Gamer. We'll correct that. Thank you.
Did we have a deputy?
No, it was a total accident, Mark. I wrote to you and said.
It was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, but you know, I had to go and check myself. But
you weren't there. I'm sorry about that, Councillor Gemmell.
yeah,
We
I
will.
was up there. I've got 100% attendance, and it's the only one that's followed.
It does happen. We don't have any public participation.
No, Chair.
Thank you very much. The next paper is the audit result for the year ended the 31st of March. Mr. Souter, are you presenting this paper?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. So, would you like to go?
Yes, good evening, members. So our report this evening sets out the results of the audits we've undertaken on the council's accounts for the year ending the 31st of March 2021. We don't have a great deal to add to the content of this evening's report, so I'll give you the brief update on the matters we said were outstanding, and then I'll hand over to James to run through the significant risk areas, just to give a little bit of a flavour with my nose. The report in the executive summary says that we're waiting on final reports from our property specialists. I can confirm to the committee we are now in receipt of those. They haven't raised any other significant issues or further issues on top of the content that's already in this report this evening. So that's positive. So other than that, there are a couple of minor areas of testing that we just need to tidy up. James and I are working through the review of the file to make sure it's all been properly completed, properly documented, and all things together. While we're going through that process, there is always the risk that something hasn't been done correctly by one of the members of the team, which does then impact how the recommendation on the next paper this evening is phrased. Just so, as we're not quite ready yet, to give the committee delegated approval of the statement of accounts, just in case anything from those remaining procedures of our audit should arise. But we're very hopeful it won't. It's not like we have reviewed items on the file or been in touch with the team beforehand, but we do have to go through and make sure it's done properly and concluded. So, I mean, to be honest, as I was preparing for the committee this evening, it sort of felt a little anticlimactic. We've done a lot of work. We don't have a great deal to say, but I will hand over to James. I will just run you through those risk areas.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sutherland.
Yes, so if I take you through page 20 in the reporting packs, this just gives you the executive summary of the significant risks that we've worked through. So just to start you with our forward risk in revenue recognition, which we apply against inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure. So that's in particular looking at PPE additions and REFCAS spend. We've completed the work in this area and there's been no matters to report. In the significant risk area of valuation of land and buildings, we've now received the final EYRE memo and been reviewing that document, which has confirmed there's been a difference, which we'll go through in a moment, relating to the former antiques market. The local team also did some testing and noted there was a difference as well on the car park assets, which we'll run through. But apart from those two issues, there was no other items to report. For the new fraud risk area that we've had this year for the compensation scheme for sales fees and charges, so that element of the COVID-19 grants, again, the work in this area is subject to final review, but so far we have no matters to report. For the pension liability evaluation, we've now received the final report from EY Pensions Consulting and have had no matters to report in that regard, and we've completed the work in this area with no issues to report. And finally, the other area of audit focus we were looking at was your accounting for COVID-19 grant income in year, and we have no matters to report to in that regard. So with that now, I direct your attention to the audit differences slide, which I've noted earlier relating to the PP assets. So that is page 36 of the reporting packs. So that gives you a bit more of a detail around the differences that we've noted with the assets. So you see that we have the former antiques market and a number of high street properties, but they're all combined into one asset essentially in your register. For those two items, they've been noticed as being overstated, but this is then offset by an understatement in the car parking income. To give you a bit more background in this area, so for the assets that were noticed being overstated, this is essentially because the valuer believed they were in a better condition than what they actually are, so it could not be let out immediately, for instance, and have to need some capital expenditure, hence the overstatement. For the car parks, this was relating to season ticket income, which was not correctly reflected in the valuer's report, so actually understated the number of car parks. In combination, the net error is an understatement of 375,000 is what we estimate the figure to be, and we're not asking for any amendment on that. It was just a report to you in this document, but it doesn't affect the opinion in any way. And with that, there's something else. We'll pass back for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sutherland. Councillors, do we have questions? Councillor Godfrey.
If I may, the significant risk of valuation of land and property. Apart from the fact that we're unlikely to have a land or property stolen from us or disappear off the map, the valuation we've seen today in our briefing earlier about the statement of account, there's quite a tidal drift of money between years, and the valuation seems to fall into that boat of 1 year up and 1 year down. What's the risk to the council or the council's finances of an overstatement or an understatement of the property assets, which are going to be still held over a long period?
If you're holding those assets over a long period, the risk is minimal. The different question is, for us, are they valued correctly in financial statements, which is fundamentally our job to make sure. So it comes back to the mentioned asset management plan, or what you plan to do with those assets over time. To give a different example, investment properties, if you had misvalued those and you were thinking about selling them as opposed to holding them, you would potentially be making that decision on the wrong information. You may not realise the right value for it or maximum value for it, and then the council could lose out. So it very much depends upon the context of what you're doing with those assets. In some ways, the value in the accounts is somewhat divorced from the longer term position around those. You can make links between the value in the accounts about what the replacement cost would be if a disaster happened, but that would be very unlikely because the risk of all your assets burning down in one go would be extremely minimal too. So there's a lot of information that supports those assets that can be used in various different ways, but as I say, there are different interpretations about the information at risk depending on the context of what council needs at the time.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Krause, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. When we last got together, we talked about new areas of focus, and obviously accounting for the COVID-19 related grant income was part of that. And what that represents perhaps is over 30 million of grants for the council to distribute and act as agent for. Also grants to compensate for loss of income. What I'm just looking for is, I guess, further comment or reassurance on how those grants were handled. I see on page 17 of or page 29 of the pack that the audit is satisfied with the treatment. Just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the work that was done to get to that conclusion. It just helps us understand a little bit around some of the risks that are present, some of the risks, and if there are risks perhaps down the line where the council may or may not be liable, if that's possible at all. There's a lot in the press around fraud around the grants and such like for COVID. So just interested in some kind of broader context, maybe of the work and of the broader risk dimension would be helpful. Thank you.
I'm going to start and then I'll hand it to James. Heads up, more detail. We look at the accounting treatment. We did not look at the individual claims that were being made for those grants and whether they were appropriately completed by claimants. That will be the responsibility of the officers, and I think internal audits have been looking at those sort of areas. Our focus is very much on, did the council identify clearly whether it was the principal or the agent? So the principal being in control of those, it made the decisions how those grants were to be used, as opposed to an agent where you just handed that money on behalf of government and passed it through. So the focus of our work was making sure that it was accountable correctly in that respect. James, can you just give an outline of some of the detailed work we did?
Yes, so We essentially started from a high level looking at the central government detail that's been provided for each grant. So they're quite prescriptive in what you can and can't do with them. So on that basis, we're able to identify, is this an agent or principal arrangement? So where they're acting as agent, if that money is unspent, you have to then give it back to central government. So we check and confirm that is reflected correctly in the accounts. For the sales fees and charges, where there can be an element more of estimation in terms of looking at the budget compared to what the expected losses are, we went back and looked at the original budgets, looked at when they were first made, so were they made before the actual grant was announced, in which case then our risk is significantly reduced. And then compared that to with the income, we looked back at your previous figures, looked at the budget and compared and basically re-performed your calculation, saw how it then went over to central government in the submission process and checked that was all acceptable. So those are the main sort of details we looked at, as Kevin said, in terms of the individual claims. So if there were any businesses claiming, we don't look at that. It's more of the whole grant that we looked at.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stoddard. Any more questions? Thank you very much. Oh, yes, Councillor Crest.
I think this is a question on this paper. It's probably not the auditors per se, but it's more on the financial statement as a whole. And perhaps I'll get to the question, maybe you can tell me, Chair, as to where I'm going or not. Page 82. So it's just interesting reading. So Chair, this is actually the financial report. So it's essentially the expenditure for itself rather than the audit position.
I think it would be more sensible if we took that under the financial report.
Very good.
Unless you feel it is related to an auditable matter.
No, I'll leave it to the next one, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillors, do we have any debate? Thank you. We are asked to, what are we asked to do? We're asked to note the accounts. I think I've lost the plot. Well, we have asked questions. Thank you very much for covering your questions. And we are asked to approve the letter of representation in Appendix 2. Now, I think, Mr. Souter, you said there might be some very, very minor amendments.
There is that possibility, Chair. So while we would like you to approve it, we would rather you didn't quite sign it right at this moment. And then if there were any amendments necessary, you would come back and make sure we inform you of that matter. But we do think there's quite a risk of given where we are in the audit at this stage.
Thank you very much. So are you happy as a committee that I sign that letter of representation when we have seen the final accounts, and you will have the opportunity to challenge anything? Is that agreed?
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Souter. Thank you, Mr. Stufford. Moving on, the annual financial report, which will be presented by Mrs. Keys. It gets more readable every year. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you, Chair. We've just taken the opportunity to give this meeting a walkthrough of the accounts and what they're showing to us. And they are very similar to the set of accounts that was brought to committee in July. There's been a handful, 6, I think, possibly minor amendments to disclosure note. But as the auditors have already said, they didn't find any significant issues for which we had to make adjustments to the statement of accounts. So this is the point in the year where committee authorises those accounts to be published. So to answer any questions, if you have any.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Crabs.
Thank you. I should have said actually, we just thank people for making this so simple, as you say, easy to read and anticlimactic. I think so it's always nice when it's that simple. But I do have a question around, as I say, page 82. It's just interesting observation on the medium-term financial plan, where it speaks along with other local authorities, the council is anticipating a significant financial challenge in the medium term. Number of key grants are forecast to reduce. Consequently, this will shift the balance of funding towards council tax, making up a larger share of overall funding. And then I looked at the graphic on the page before, which spoke to income reductions for council tax of £500,000. We obviously had other income reductions as well in terms of business rates, car parking. We would have got support from the government for those. We can imagine those picking back up again, so maybe the risk for those continuing is reduced. For council tax, I'm not so sure about the future of that. I'm just wondering what the makeup of that reduction is between defaults and support that we provide. So wondering what the risk is going forward as to default on council tax. Despite the tightening of the labour market, we can imagine unemployment increasing. So any thoughts perhaps on what the future might hold in terms of that as a risk going forward?
Mr. Botham, take that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the table there refers to the revised budget that we set out back in last September, where I think we started that year forecasting capital tax income of around £90 million. We revised that as part of this revised budget and down by 4 million. So we were assuming a tougher position and a 4 million loss. Now, that was 2.2 million of that related to non-payment, and 1.8 related to additional support claims. So broadly between non-payment and support claims. And the Winchester share of that, of course, the collection authority was the
Richard, sorry, it's given up.
Yeah, so the half million reflects the share of that. We, off the top of my head, I can't remember what the outturn position was, but it was, I think, not dissimilar to that, a little bit worse than that by the time we finished the year as well. So the forecasts that we're now including in the medium-term financial strategy take account of that, of the current position that we're facing. Collection rate is still very strong, so we're still around the 98–99% collection rate, which is positive. We have amended our support scheme as well, so that will have some impact on that collection rate. But we are anticipating continuing tough times, and the medium-term strategy does reflect that. But whether or not that will become more challenging as time moves forward, I think that time will tell.
Thank you, Ms. Botham. Any more questions? Thank you. I think we do need to congratulate not only the finance team on the production of these accounts and the annual report, but also the economy and the revenues team. There was an enormous amount of work involved in getting this government money out to where it needed to be, and I think they did an exemplary job, and I'm very glad to see a clean audit of the process. So we would like to do that. Any debate, councillors? Recommendations are that we delegate approval of the audited statement of accounts as set out in Appendix 1, subject to any amendments that may arise, and that on receipt of the audit's work, the Chair and the Audit of the Governance Committee signs the statement of responsibilities on your behalf. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Moving on. Mr O'Reilly, I think you're going to present item 8, the final report and pay policy statement. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. All local authorities have to produce a pay policy statement and a discretionary pensions policy statement and update it annually and publish it on their website. This is an annual report that you get. Things to say about it from the last year is that the pay award from 1st of April 2021 hasn't been agreed yet. So we're still waiting for that to be agreed, and clearly this is referring to figures which will be updated when that award is finally agreed. And secondly, last time we met earlier in the year, we talked about the government's exit pay cap regulation. In fact, they were withdrawn by the government at the end of the and no other appeal of the policy statement, which we discussed last time. Pay policy statement essentially sets out how we can pay employees and what rules and limits are around that. And the pensions policy looks at discussions that the council is allowed to use and sets out which ones we have chosen to use and which ones we've chosen not to use. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
Councillors, any questions? Councillor Becker.
Good evening. I think you probably know what I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
You've got reference in the paper to equality impact assessment.
Yeah.
But there doesn't seem to be an equality impact assessment. Where is it?
Okay. The equality impact assessment has been done and it hasn't been attached to the report itself because what it says is that I'm happy to circulate it now. It says that this policy will not have an effect on any individual group on the basis of race, gender, sex, disability, sexual orientation, age, religious belief, gender reassignment, marital partnerships, pregnancy or maternity, and that no negative impacts have been identified. The assessment was done on the 12th of February. So I think it's circulate that. We didn't attach it because it was completely clear.
No, that's fine, but as a public authority, as the decision makers, it's our responsibility to take that into account. So we have to see, we have to see that information.
Ask that to circulate it straight after the
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Becker. Any more questions, councillors? Any debate? We are asked to recommend this policy to the council for adoption. Is that agreed?
It would be good to see the equality impact assessment before we agree it. I think it's subject to seeing the equality impact assessment. I think we would be failing in our duty, in our statutory duty to make a recommendation without seeing that information.
An excellent qualification. Thank you. Thank you. Is that agreed? Sorry, Councillor.
I think we had that assessment without.
We've had a conclusion. We haven't seen any of the evidence that supports that. And as public decision makers, we are under a statutory duty to consider equality matters. So if you feel that you've had sufficient information to make that decision, then that's fine for you, Councillor Godfrey. But personally, I don't feel that I can, with all my hand on my heart, say that I have had enough information to make a recommendation.
Make decisions faster.
Thank you, Councillor Becker. We will approve that subject to satisfactory viewing of the equality impact assessment. Is that agreed? Thank you. Mr O'Reilly, you're on next with agenda item.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
10, the workforce report. I think you can expect quite a few questions.
So I will start with an apology to say that there's a typo. I've just noticed while I'm reading this before I came into the meeting at table 3. They're actually 75% of our employees are full-time and 25% are part-time. And then in table 3, they're reversed, so there's the wrong way around. Sorry about that. So with that out of the way, I'll move on to introduce the report. This is a new report which you asked for last time we met, which is giving you a sort of snapshot of the workforce. So you've got things to look at and discuss. It goes through a number of HR-related headlines. We can add more detail the next time we do this if you wish, and we propose to bring an update next summer for the Governance and Audit Committee if that's acceptable to you. So we look here at headcount, which is 436 employees. That's down. So this is from the last financial year, the same way as you have for the audit financial reports just this evening. Headcount is 436, which is down from 462. Turnover is 20%, which is up from 17% in the previous year. Length of service, we've noticed 9 years, 6 months, the average length of service. Sickness is down from 5.95 days to it was 7.51 days. Interestingly, you can read the report that flu and colds have dropped significantly in the short-term absence. And that's probably to do, well, certainly to do with the pandemic and people staying at home and not flu so much. We've got quality data in there. Saying we've got a predominantly female workforce, 60% female. We mentioned the gender pay gap, which is 7.4%, compared, which is obviously better than the national average of 15.5%. Mentioned full-time and part-time employees. We've got 93% of our employees are permanent and the rest fixed term. And we've given an account of what the council managers and HR, the activities that we've done to support the employees through this unusual and difficult year of the pandemic. So we've got a list of all the different things we've done there, including staff surveys, mental health support, online learning, and so on. That's again information for your benefit, if you like. That's that kind of information. We'll give more of that next time. We've given you the reasons for leaving in the table in further down, which was worth noting that last year, this time actually, in fact, we were in the throes of quite a large consultation on reduction in staffing levels with the unions, and we deleted 14 posts from the establishment as part of that, which will obviously have impacted on the turnover figures going up. We've got our age profile data in here, which is actually close to our other local authorities. Local government tends to have an older workforce than private sector. That's one of the factors that you can make. We have our policy data around ethnicity as well in there. Only 40% of our employees so far have completed the sensitive and personal data on the HR system, and we need to obviously drive that figure up, but it's very much looking to make their personal choice about doing that. So it's something which you've asked for to discuss and talk about, so I'm happy to sort of provide it to you. Hope you found it interesting reading, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. I found it fascinating, I have to say. Councillors, do we have questions? That's about it. Thank you.
Very much. I'm just very concerned about the turnover of staff. I've been concerned about this ever since I joined the council. It does seem very high. How do we compare with other authorities? I mean, this figure is 87, which is about 20%.
Yeah, where turnover is 20%, it's gone up to 17%, but so that's largely to do with the fact that we actually made some staff redundant last year. So I think there's a turnover to be concerned about is people leaving who don't want to leave, particularly in the redundancy situation. The reverse is true. So I don't think it's galloping away. I think it's stabilising and really coming down now. Turnover, how does it compare? 15% is the turnover, the average for the country. So we're slightly above the average for the country. Other local authorities, my last local authority, our turnover was about 12%, but in certain parts, that was a unitary authority. In certain parts of that authority, like social care, it was well over 20%, so it depends. With 430 staff, 20% turnover, I don't think it's a major cause of concern. I think that it's not. If it was moving up rapidly, I would be concerned. I think next time we report to you, it would come down again because of that redundancy situation I mentioned. I think it would be below 20% next time. Yeah.
And also be interested in where the turnover occurs, because if it's focused on one department, then we clearly need to think about other matters, improving recruitment, increasing pay, whatever is necessary. Are there any?
I think the reasons for leaving in the report are instructive in terms of that gives you an idea of why people are leaving the organisation. And clearly, if they were all leaving because they were getting back paid jobs and other authorities, that would be more of a concern. There's just quite a wide range of reasons, and last year the main reason was redundancy. We've got other ones in there like retirement, people moving to further education, personal reasons and so on. Some areas do have higher turnover than others. I haven't looked at it with me to give you specific details on that, but we can certainly break that down, turnover figures for the next report. But anecdotally, I would suggest that some services do have higher turnover levels.
Councillor Mayne.
Sorry. When we're looking at these reasons for leaving, can we mark it against the national average as well? So that we can get a comparison to see where we are.
Yes, we can see if we can find a national average for those reasons for leaving for next time.
And Councillor Gemmell, thank you.
Yes, just out of interest on the leavers, are we, do we have a regime of exit interviews? Who is undertaking it?
Every person that leaves is sent a exit questionnaire, which asks them, that's how we get the data about the reasons for leaving, and that critical by HR, and that questionnaire also asks if they'd like to have a face-to-face interview with someone from HR or a line manager, and if they say yes, then we set that up and we take whatever action is required from that interview. But most of this information comes from questionnaires that's sent back to HR.
And Councillor, sorry.
So how many actually come back with a personal? It's just of interest because I know another public service which has which has nothing to do with this, even this area, I hasten to say. There is a couple of instances of bullying which is not coming out and not going through to an exit interview, and has just recently managed to find it because somebody requested an exit interview with someone that was several grades higher, and now it will definitely hit the fan. And I was appalled thinking that we go on in such an easy format, thinking, oh, we're covered, and then you find that, well, yes, we're covered because nobody will speak about it. And it was just a matter of interest. It's not.
Yeah, clearly, if any employee was being bullied in this council, then they would have an opportunity to raise that through the grievance procedure. Or if they left, they could ask for a confidential interview with HR, and then we could take that further. But luckily, no one those situations were raised.
And what if there was a bullying incident before they left? We want to obviously.
Yeah, well, we would advise that they should raise that through the grievance procedure. That's the correct way to deal with that.
Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. 2 points, one training, one apprentices. The report doesn't include any information about training over this report here. Could you give a summary of what training has been delivered and how much of a budget has been used up in that training?
Okay. The way that we do training at council has changed dramatically since the pandemic. When I first came here, we had plans to do a lot of face-to-face training with managers through a program called First Descent, and we were which we already launched before I got here. We were going to do another round with new managers and refreshers and so on. So there's quite a lot of money to be spent on that, but it was all scrapped because of the pandemic. So most of the training that we've done, not all the training we've done since the pandemic, has been online. Online training is a lot cheaper than face-to-face training. So actually we haven't spent as much of the budget as we would have spent. We've probably spent about 30% of the budget that we've set aside for training. So we have a month spent in training. We did last year, and we will again this year because of that. Having said that, we've got a wide suite of online training, which we've had because of the pandemic. We've added to obviously things around managing remote workforces, dealing with mental health issues from working from home and so on. So we have a bigger suite of online learning. When the pandemic lifts, to the extent that we can hold face-to-face training, then we will, our training strategy will change, and we'll look back to see what we can do, because we can only go so far really with online learning. You can do some blended learning, you bring them together with some face-to-face learning, but really it would be nice to be able to get some employees in a place like this with a couple of flip charts and get them working with some learning experiences together. And I think that that's what people in HR are very much looking forward to.
Thank you. My second point about apprenticeship.
Yeah.
The demographics in the report continue to show that we have a very mature workforce. And the apprenticeship program, which we've run for the last 8 to 10 years, has successfully brought through some key staff at lower range.
Yeah.
There are only 2 apprentices in this report mentioned have been recruited. Is that because we only tried to recruit 2? And as to why is the number so low?
I think you're right to say that if we were able to recruit externally more apprentices and target our recruitment advertising at younger people from the community, we could change the age profile. So that's something that I'm very interested in doing. I think that the way that we recruit apprentices, it breaks into 2 parts really to the apprenticeship levy. One is that you can use, for existing employees, they can take up apprenticeships. So for example, might be an admin person, might take up a degree apprenticeship and then move on to take a professional skill job within the council. For people who are employed externally at the moment, we ask services to convert an existing post in their establishment to make an apprenticeship post. And service can sometimes be reluctant to do that, because even for a lower graded post, they might prefer to get someone who's got experience rather than somebody who is brand new. So it's something that I think that we look at for our HR strategy going forward, and report next time we report to you, to say whether we can find some way of making services more willing to say, I would like to convert this post to recruit to an apprentice. I've been involved in programs like that before, and it can be quite refreshing for an organisation to have a dozen young apprentices, in different parts of organisations. So I'd be very keen on that. I think it raises the issue about page profile, and it can reduce turnover, but it can keep them on and promote them through the organisation. So it's very much an area that I'm interested in.
Thank you. I'm going to take Councillor Crass, then Councillor Miller, then Councillor Becker. Councillor Crass.
Thank you. There's a question around recruitment and the risks associated with recruitment. I know it's talked to you about there being 50 external appointments, but nothing about how long it took to recruit, to make those appointments, and the risk of the current labour market. I mean, I think if I look around, think about the recruitment that I've been aware of, ranging from the retrofit officer for the council housing, planning enforcement, even up to the director recruitment. None of the recruitment seems to have been easy, and none of them were recruited at the first round. And the candidates seem to be low in number. And I hesitate to kind of transfer industry practice or industry to what's going on in the broader industry. It doesn't relate to the council necessarily, but the labour market's tight, and but I don't see any risk of recruitment identified here.
Yeah, we don't identify the inability to recruit as a risk at the moment. I think we have some issues in people about recruiting and in planning, which they've dealt with quite largely through internal promotions. As far as other posts are concerned, we have probably more people applying for the jobs now than we did before the pandemic. And it does take time to recruit people in local authorities, the process that we go through. The next meeting, what I would have to do, if you would find it helpful is to give some indication about how many posts need to be re-advertised. That's a good indicator for how difficult it is to recruit, because if nobody, we can say, we advertise a job, nobody applied, we have to advertise it again, or we advertise a job, 5 people applied, but none of them were good enough, we have to advertise it again. If you see a lot of those posts coming up, then you might see that we'll do something about recruitment, maybe do some sort of recruitment partner to help us, public or whatever. When I first came there, I was very interested in working with jobs going public, and the pandemic came along, and it wasn't necessary to do that. To begin with, in the pandemic, people weren't really moving either, so we're in a bit of a meaningful piece as far as recruitment is concerned. But from an HR point of view, we don't regard recruitment as a risk factor at the moment, but one where people on their surveillance.
We get debate on this.
I think we will have debate. It's a very interesting report and several themes are coming out. So there will be debate. Thank you. Have you finished, Councillor Price? I could come.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Miller.
I think quite a lot of my points actually cover that last question. And my big concern is there's a massive number of vacancies out there. They're not particularly the world's greatest attractive employer. Are we going to start to see more and more staff drifting away? And what are we going to do about making sure that we can really recruit? Because now people seem to have got over COVID and a lot of things have opened up. There's going to be an awful lot more jobs out there, and everybody else is putting their pay rates up, including Amazon and all sorts of strange people like that. You know, how are we going to cope with that threat to our staff levels?
I said earlier that the number of people who are leaving, if we're in a situation where people leave and we couldn't fill the vacancies, then we also couldn't do the work, then that would obviously then be a very serious situation. That's not the place we find ourselves in. We do have a number of vacancies, as you rightly point out, in the council, but a lot of those vacancies are covered by agency staff, and some of them are deliberately vacant because of waiting for things like restructures or changes or just budgetary reasons. So we basically you've got two types of vacancies. You've got a vacancy which the service is sitting on for whatever reason, because they might want to restructure or whatever. And then you've got the vacancy, so they put forward to HR. And the ones that are put forward to HR to recruit to, we are successfully recruiting to the vast majority of them, except with some caveats around leaving.
Thank you. And Councillor Becker, please.
Thanks, Chair. Two questions. One relates to the survey itself. It would be great next time if we could see the headlines from the survey. Drawing on what other people have questioned about, did it include questions such as, why are people leaving? Are they planning on leaving in the next year, 2 years, 5 years? So we can get some sort of forward planning and know when those gaps are going to hit. Did it ask about bullying and if people, drawing on Councillor Gemmell's excellent questions, people may feel that they don't want to cause a fuss, they don't want to raise a problem, but feel safer responding in surveys to saying, yes, I have seen bullying, or no, I don't feel safe reporting bullying and reporting in that sort of way. I ask because I work in a public body and we do a staff survey every year, and I've recently been doing an exercise going through comparing against different characteristics, and it's really striking to see the differences between different groups and how they appreciate. If we can see that would be great.
Okay, if I just say something about the surveys, that I'm very familiar with the type of survey that you described, which will range over a range of HR employee related issues, including, have you ever experienced or seen bullying as a good example? So a question you might get in a standard survey, are you planning to leave in the next 5 years, and how satisfied are you overall, things like that. Surveys that we did, they weren't those kind of off-the-shelf surveys that my previous authority, we got an external company to do this for us. These ones we designed ourselves with managers and HR, which we're really looking at what's it like for the employees now working at home in the beginning all the time, for most of them, except the ones that had to come in. And a lot of the questions were based around that experience of working from home. So the questions were like, what's communications like now? Do you feel supported? Is teamwork still happening and one-to-one still happening? do you like working at home? Do you need the equipment? You know, is your IT okay? They were very specific questions, and we were quite reassured by the answers we did the first one, and then we did the follow-up one, which was even more reassuring. And one of the big headlines that could come out of it was that 90% of our employees felt that when the pandemic's over, they like to have a mix of working from home and working in the office rather than go back to the status quo as it was before. Results are actually on the intranet of the staff survey, so that I can.
We don't know that.
No, I know that. So, but I will make sure that we next get these circulating results and some of the results will be back in both surveys. So make sure that happens.
Thank you. And my second question relates again to, oh, my laptop is dying, equality issues. Why are there only two characteristics or three characteristics if we include gender? There's nothing about religion, LGBTQ issues.
Yeah, what we're trying to do here is look at the sensitive data that we filled in on the HR system and see if the numbers are enough that we can publish them without possibly identifying people. Within 430 staff, only 40% filling it in, we get to quite low numbers, and we need to be really careful with people. Let's say, oh, one person, who's that? Let's try and figure out who it is. So that's the reason we tried not to do that. But you know, clearly, as we get more people filling in that part of the sensitive data, and then we'll hopefully be able to be in a position to report more of that, which clearly the bigger priorities are much easier to do.
Thank you very much. I have a question about the ethnicity profile. How closely does it represent our communities?
Well, the headline figure is that on the Winchester district, and the trouble with the figures we're quoting is that from 2011, the census has obviously just come out for this year, so quite old figures. But for the district, 95.6% of people in the last census recorded their ethnicity as white British. In Winchester City Council, the number is 97%. So we're close, but we're still slightly in the wrong direction.
And how concerned should we be about the age profile of our staff? We've referred to the energising effect of free young apprentices. We've also looked at the number of staff that retired. We are aware that many staff are reassessing their options as a consequence of the last 18 months. And we are aware that lack of staff affects service delivery.
Yeah. I think that if you go back quite a long time now, if I was looking at these figures and we still had the cost of retirement age, I'd be very worried. But actually, those statistics, the cost of retirement age has been abolished. People tend to retire over quite a long period of time, up to 20 years really. You get people who retire at 55 and often go on to 75 these days. So, so you look at that figure, you can't say, well, because of their age, they're all going to retire in the next year, 2 years, whatever. It's very much unknown. But I think the risk factor is more about who's got the experience and the knowledge that might retire, although they would leave anyway, they weren't at this age. But clearly, when people get into their 60s and they're thinking of retiring, and you think if they retired, what would we lose? And now we're making any contingency plans to deal with that. That's the key issue, I think. That should really be being picked up by managers through appraisals, and because as part of appraisals, talk about any other career plans we talk about. We would hope that people, long-serving employees, would say, actually, I'm planning to retire in 2 years' time, and say, oh, and you're the only person that deals with this or this or this database or whatever. We'll start putting some plans in to make sure other people can be prepared to take over. So I think in terms of that continuity planning, in terms of business continuity planning, trying to find out when key staff are going to plan to retire, not in an intrusive way, of course, because nobody has to tell us that, and making plans to deal with that can be really, really helpful, because if somebody gives 3 months notice and you suddenly think, oh, I've got 3 months to cover what they can do, that can be quite daunting sometimes. So I've always encouraged people to say, just be upfront about it, we're not going to hold you to it. If you think you're retiring, change your mind, that's fine. But also to a certain extent, if people are hit by the proverbial bus, we should really have contingency plans anyway for people, because you can't, if you're down to a single point of failure, then you've got a problem. So managers should be discussing this through team meetings and the one-to-ones and through their service plans to make sure that they have, they're in a position if somebody just was not there by a bus tomorrow, they wouldn't, service wouldn't fall over.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. I think that concludes questions, so I intend to move on to debate. Concerns I'm picking up are about apprentices. Are we making best use of apprentices? How can we improve our staff retention? How can we make the jobs more attractive so that we can recruit more easily? Are we offering the right working conditions regarding flexibility? Is there anybody working off the top of an orange box at home where we ought to be supplying better equipment? And the staff survey, and what else should we add to the list, please? Let's move into debate. Councillor Gemmell.
Yes, in the light of my external experience, I would like to raise the question or raise the ability of somebody to reevaluate the robustness of a grievance procedure that could avoid reporting directly or indirectly to the person concerning the bullying. And I find that what I have learned from, again, from externally, is that the person can be several levels up, but can spread a wide net, and you have no recourse to somebody who would be able to intervene, or even at the level above, they go, well, you just have to put up with it, even though there is written procedures not to. And I've, as with everything, I have a policy which I passed on to everyone that I have dealt with as group manager, and it's a simple one. You will not go wrong within the council if with all your actions you act with honour. And the majority of people that I've come across in this life do act with honour, do understand the words duty and the duty of care. When you find that you have one maverick that does not act with honour, it runs a horse and cart through the policies that we all carefully adhere to. And that is my concern, that people at a lower level are overrun without us. We can put the policies in and we can sit at this level and we can say, we have got this and we have got this, and this will address. And we're doing it from the theoretical level, not from the practical level of somebody who reports to somebody who reports to somebody else who goes, anyone coming to me with stress can just pick up their P45. Now, we know that can't happen. We know that shouldn't happen. But I can tell you it does happen, and it's done constructively. And I would always say, leave plain constructive dismissal and go through, make sure you've got evidence. But people don't want to do that. They'll just walk away and go, I can go somewhere else. I would never like to think of that happening here. So I'm just putting in the heads up. Can somebody test the robustness of our grievance procedures?
And because so many of our staff are working out and about, they're almost more exposed. Mr. O'Reilly.
Oh, just saying that it's good timing you mentioned that, because we're actually reviewing the grievance procedure at the moment, and we're going to be consulting with Unison and the ELB on a revised grievance procedure. So what you've suggested we do, we are actually in the process of doing.
Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Having chaired the Personnel Committee from an early time, my incumbency as a councillor, I've been remiss in not pointing out the steady and excellent progress we made on the sickness figures, which former councillor Rob Sanders was very keen to make sure we reduced rapidly, and we have. However, I do think we need also need to note that while we have reduced it just below 6% during this last 12 months, our own department, I think Upper Hill, is below 1% in the same period. Much better figures can still be achieved, particularly as the report points out, most of this sickness is through long-term absence, which has been a hard to move level for many years. I think more effort should be looked at how this these people who have got long-term sickness can be helped for the benefit of all. Second point is to emphasise the issue about apprentices. I can't say how disappointed I am that we have failed to recruit more apprentices in this last year. They have been lifeblood on so many occasions, bringing superb skills and as well as enlightened youth to our workforce. And I think that we are letting down the Winchester by not making ourselves a leader in the recruitment of apprentices and setting an example, as we have done for many years previously, to other employers, that there is a workforce who wants to work in Winchester, and we want to make it possible for them to gather practical skills to then also lead follow a career in public administration. Thank you.
And Councillor Benton.
Okay. I think it's very interesting. We've spent far longer talking about people and personnel problems than finances. And I think that's right, because the people are the most important part of this authority. We depend on all the people that are employed, and we need to do the best we can for them. The Chair's already raised a number of issues which need thinking about, and I know Councillor Godfrey said he was on the Personnel Committee. Well, I was on the Personnel Committee, and I thought the work we did there was very valuable, and it did show that we cared for all the officers, and we do have a responsibility of care. I noticed one figure here, 24% of the absences were down to mental health. It said personal, but do we know it's all personal? How much mental health problems perhaps were caused at work? So I think we do need to keep far more in touch than this one-off every now and again report on personnel problems. When we were on Personnel Committee, we had the rolling figures, and I think Councillor Godfrey referred to those. We could see the improvements over a quarter, over a year. And I think we need to spend far more time on personnel than we do.
Mr. O'Reilly, I wanted to say that as a reason for absence, mental health reasons predominate across all local authorities now. That's really different to what others were saying many decades ago. But so we're not unusual in that, and we do give people opportunity to say if their work, if it's work related. Most of it isn't work related. Sometimes work can combine with bereavements or whatever for people to take time off. Unfortunately, mental health issues. This authority has a wide range actually of initiatives around mental health. With your health plan, confidential counselling, mental health first aiders, lots of training, lots of stuff in City Voice. And I've worked with a number of local authorities, but this is by far the best I've seen in terms of mental health. So I think you should be commended for that.
Please hear that.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Looking at the list of concerns we have in front of us, Mr. O'Reilly, I note that 4 of them should not be aired in public. They should not be in a public meeting. And I wonder if there is some merit in having a subcommittee to put look at the results of, amongst other things, the results of appraisals, the working conditions, the flexibility, whether we can improve our flexibility, the staff surveys. That should not be in public domain, but a subcommittee may be able to look at that and give the benefit of their wisdom and experience. And the grievance procedures is another matter, because we are concerned that this is a risk to service delivery, and I don't think that's a surprise to you at all. And
just say that I'm always happy to let the members of the subcommittee if that's what's required.
I think we would like to convene that subcommittee, members. Are you happy that Mr. O'Reilly and I sort out a terms of reference that allows us to consider these matters? Councillor Godfrey.
Particularly if the terms of reference include working hours of those who are still employed. So we could attend out of normal working hours.
You would like it to be an evening meeting, or weekends, I expect.
Or in the morning, would be fine.
Mrs. Keys, thank you.
Given that you already highlighted that perhaps some of this is not a discussion that you want to have at a committee, rather than calling it a subcommittee, would it be an advisory group or a working group, perhaps?
I take advice from officers on this.
Chair, we did touch on this before, and I would prefer it initially be set up as just an informal group with this committee, that will allow Mr. O'Reilly to provide further details and have that sort of more informal discussions. And if that then becomes a more formal subcommittee, moving forward, we can discuss that. We do obviously need to bear in mind the additional work that creates, obviously, and
very much.
Obviously we would fully understand the importance that members are placing on this area. That's quite right that you do. Equally, we as senior officers and the executive leadership board, we have our duties towards the running the executive and are looking at these areas at the same time. So what I wouldn't want to do is ask Mr. O'Reilly to do this work twice. But there's real value, I think, isn't there, in digging in further into this information. But if we could do that through an informal group, then over the next month or so, that would be helpful.
I think that would be very useful. We don't want to duplicate work, Mr. O'Reilly. We don't want to cover the same work twice. But I think members want to demonstrate to staff that we value them and want to keep them. Any further debate, members? Councillor Cross.
Well, I think most of what I wanted to talk about has been covered, so I won't make a point other than I think reiterate what a number of people have said around why this is so important to us and why we want to talk about it. Because the people are critical, the people on the council, the people in the services, and it's great having this document to see some of the metrics. It's great to hear from you actually to understand the richness of what's going on, and it's helped me understand what is going on and alleviate some of my concerns, particularly around recruitment. There was a motion at last council for investment in enforcement and planning officers. So that's the level of criticality that the council members take for services that are provided. And with the organisation under the pressure that it is, with cost savings, with the difficulty that people are finding working in this COVID type environment, we do need to protect people and support them in the various ways that have been talked about. Again, I don't like to take practice from industry, but there's something, there's a lot of research at the moment, and something called the Great Resignation, the Great Attrition. With people who have
been locked down with their jobs for the last 2 years. They're fed up with it. They're kind of re-evaluating their life, thinking about, okay, is this really what I want to be doing? Or, COVID could hit any time. I want to make sure I make the best use of it. And they are thinking about leaving, and that's a global phenomenon. I think we are impacted in this country, particularly because of Brexit. It's tightening the labour market in particular, so getting placements for our people is all the more difficult. So it's a critical operational risk that we do have people leaving, particularly with the age profile we've got, and the difficulty in replacing. But I think I'm just emphasising what everyone's been saying. So thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. By the way, I do want to make it clear that this is no reflection on senior management team. I'm very well aware how much effort they have been putting in to supporting staff over the last 20 months, but we want to get alongside you on this. Thank you. Mrs. Graham, are you happy that you have a resolution that we work up some terms of reference?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that informal group. Thank you. Shall we move on, councillors? Thank you. Thank you very much for your time on that, and thank you for that report. I know we had to wait for it because you were busy on other matters, but you can see we found it very useful. Thank you. The next agenda item is item 11, the invitation to become an opted-in authority. Mrs. Keys, would you like to take us through that?
Thank you, Chair. I brought a report to this committee back in July, I think it was, because you requested a bit more information, a bit more background and detail on who the PSAA are, what their role was, and in that report, I added some background detail as to why we'd opted into the national scheme for the appointment of auditors. We are now being asked by the PSAA whether we would like to opt in to the scheme going forward for the appointment of auditors for 23-24 through to 2027-28, so the next appointing period. So just as a bit more background, really, I've got a quote from the chairman of the Local Government Association, who says that the LGA set up the PSAA to provide a way for councils to meet the legislative requirements of audit procurement without unnecessary bureaucracy, and to provide leverage for councils by collaborating in a difficult market. Now more important than ever that councils work together to ensure that we get what we need from the audit market. And as we've heard our own auditors from Ernst & Young say, it is a difficult market out there. They're struggling to recruit auditors to do their audits. They're struggling to schedule them, which is why ours hasn't been completed by the 30th September deadline. And that's not a challenge which I think just local government auditors and audit firms are facing. It's across the whole audit sector. So there are lots of benefits to opting into the PSAA scheme. The PSAA will manage the recruitment process on behalf of all opting authorities. They can obviously offer all the benefits from the scale of the procurement. They have expertise from managing audit contracts, as I've set out in the report we did before. And the alternative to opting into the national scheme is that we would have to establish our own independent auditor panel. So that wouldn't be the Audit and Governance Committee, that would be a panel that has a majority of independent members. And they would advise on the selection and appointment of the auditor. They would have to devise a policy on obtaining non-audit services from the auditors. And they would also be advising on maintaining independent relationships with the auditors. So obviously we would be looking for people with experience, but who are also independent, which may be difficult to find. And another advantage of opting into the PSAA scheme is that they have sort of a backstop that in the event that the procurement fails to attract sufficient capacity to enable auditor appointments, they have the fallback option to extend their existing contracts for further time. So that would also be a benefit if there was a crisis in the market. I would also just say that, as I said in the report in July, that we can't look at appointing local firms, much as we might want to put the work to local firms and smaller firms. We have to select from a list of only 8 large national audit firms, so we're very restricted who we would be able to procure with, and we would have to run that whole procurement exercise ourselves. I also mentioned in the report in July that there were only 8 local authority bodies who didn't opt in to the scheme last time round, and I did a little bit of research as much as I could to try and determine the audit fees that they had paid, and they were very much in line with the audit fees that we were paying. So disappointed as we were with the increase in our fees, it was comparable to the fees that other councils who hadn't opted into the scheme had paid. So in summary, I will bring a report to this committee at its next meeting next month in December for you to make a recommendation to council, because it has to be a council decision as to whether we opt into the scheme or not. But hopefully that gives you some background and some food for thought. And whether Richard wants to add anything else here.
Which is a pretty thorough summary. I think certainly as officers, we feel that the case to continue with the PSA is strong, but with that will be feature in the report. But obviously, the scheme will reflect any of your comments that you make here for that report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Miller, you had a question?
I have a question with this comment. I think urge us desperately to join that scheme, because if we don't, we're going to find it remarkably difficult. There's a real shortage of public sector auditors out there. They probably won't even bother to come to firms, the councils that don't opt in, because they're not going to bother. It's so small fry for the amount of paperwork they'd have to do for it. I think if we don't stay in the scheme, we'll find it remarkably difficult, remarkably expensive to find an auditor, given the fact there's only 8 of them and they're all big. So it's that contract alone would be so tiny, they probably wouldn't even bother to answer it.
I see lots of nods. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. It would be useful, however, to consider the options. And I wonder if the report at our next meeting could answer the questions of the experience of neighbouring authorities such as East Hampshire, not on PSA, I understand. The true costs that they have incurred, which although on the face of it are seem to be similar, I suspect may have additional costs, as often, I've dealt with East Hampshire in the past. They often are very proud of the things they've done, but it costs a lot more.
Are you referring to internal costs, Councillor Godfrey, that may not be apparent?
We're setting up, for instance, of the independent committee, which would not, you won't get right people for nothing. The options for cooperating with other non-opted in authorities in a mini PSA scheme, and whether or not that is in any way viable option, none of which I would choose on previous evidence. But I've been so disappointed by the attitude of the EY demand for extra payments after signing a contract. Almost immediately they had signed it, but yes, it's more like a shabby way to deal with this. But that's. I suspect I would follow Councillor Miller's advice. I would like to ask a question.
I think that should probably be part of the justification when we come to make decisions as Keys. Is that all right to have that additional data? Councillor Becker, did you? No? Just not. Do we have any more questions, Mrs. Keys? Thank you. I think that draws us to the end of the agenda. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Meeting closed at 19:50.